Thank you for joining us today. Our topic is driving systems change. So you will find today's webinar recording on our YouTube channel, linked on our webpage, tnworks.org, along with all past virtually speaking webinars in our online library. All who register for today's webinar will receive an email with the link to the recording as well as our webinar materials. As questions arise during today's presentation, please go ahead and enter your questions in the Q&A box, and we will cover them at the end of the presentation during our question and answer segment of this webinar. We encourage you to follow us on social media for future topics and events. Our Facebook is American Job Centers of Northwest Tennessee, American Job Centers of Southwest Tennessee, and American Job Center Greater Memphis. I'd like to introduce you to today's panelist, Dr. Nishesh Chalise, and he serves as the Senior Manager of the Community Development Research Team at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. He joined the St. Louis Fed in June of 2020 as the Director of Community-Based Policy and Analysis. Nishesh specializes in using community-engaged research to better understand economic conditions in low and moderate income households and communities across the 8th Federal Reserve District and beyond. Before joining the St. Louis Fed, Dr. Chalise was an assistant professor of social work in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he taught baccalaureate and graduate courses on research, program evaluation, and community development. He has years of experience conducting community-engaged research in and outside of the U.S. He holds a PhD and a master's degree in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. We are so thankful to have his expertise to share with us today. So without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for taking the time to kind of talk about this very important topic, driving systems change together. I've been doing systems thinking work for many years, and I get to do this through the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis now. So it's very exciting. Um, uh, my name is Nishesh Chalise, and I work with the Community Development Research Team. And if you're not familiar with the community development function within the Federal Reserve Bank system, the community development function is kind of charged with understanding challenges and opportunities within low to moderate income communities across the nation. And so, because we are in St. Louis, we look at the 8th district. We also do a lot of national work. So in our work, the way we kind of try to work with communities is we try to understand, we listen to community stakeholders, understand the trends, understand what barriers they are facing. We learn from that. We learn from research analysis as well, and then we respond. And we usually respond in two ways. One is providing the analysis and research to communities, but also we convene. We are a third-party neutral convener, so we get folks at the table and try to figure out how we can coordinate and collaborate better to drive systems change together. Okay. Just a quick disclaimer, the views expressed here are those of are mine and not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis or the Federal Reserve System. So just in terms of the outline, and I will send the organizers the deck, so you will get a copy of this. But in terms of outline, I'm going to talk about complex problems for a little bit, because when we are thinking about systems, one of the main difference is that the problems that we are dealing with are really complex. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to kind of go into like, what does it really mean to think in systems? How do we think in systems? And then I'm going to kind of share a case study of application of systems thinking in workforce development. This is work that I did, exploratory kind of ongoing work that I did in Arkansas last year, and then wrap up the presentation, and we'll have some time for discussion. So yes, please send your discussion questions in the chat throughout the presentations. Okay. So let's begin with a story of systems. I like this because I think this kind of provides a really good example of what what we mean by complex problems. So there is an island off the coast of Australia called the Macquarie Island. And this is the island very important in terms of kind of the ecosystem, the wildlife there. And kind of as history goes, in 1878, a population of rabbit was introduced in this island. And in 1968, the rabbit population grew to 100,000, and it was eating all the vegetation. It was kind of just creating an imbalance in the ecosystem. And so the scientists who were, and other people who were taking care of the island decided to introduce a virus to control the rabbit population. And it worked. By 1980, the rabbit population had decreased to 20,000, right? So the intervention worked. However, as systems do, the invasive cat species in the island started kind of eating the local birds, the indigenous birds. Why? Because they were relying on the rabbits, and now a lot of the rabbits are dead. So now they are kind of just switching into a different prey, right? So then the scientists were like, well, we can't have all these invasive cat species destroying the local bird population. We need to do something about this. And then in 1985, they implemented plans to remove the cats. And it was successful. They're very good at intervening and solving that. Rabbit population introduced back in the day in 1968 became a problem. Scientists introduced virus. Rabbit population went down. But the cat species started eating the local birds, and they were like, this is a new problem. They removed the cats, and then the rabbit population started increasing again, and they were like, okay, this is just causing ecosystem destruction. And so why am I sharing this was about driving systems change together. We're supposed to talk about workforce, but I'm sharing this example because what this example really nicely captures is how there are interdependencies in a system, right? So if we think about this ecological system, there are different components to it, right? There's the rabbit, there is like local birds, plants, there is the cat population, and there are like humans who are, or scientists who are kind of trying to manage this, right? So they are all interdependent, and one action impacts another action, and then problems emerge over time, right? So that's what systems do. And if you think about social systems, economic systems, systems that you work with, this is what happens. You try to solve one problem, another problem comes up. It oftentimes feels like playing whack-a-mole, right? So that this is what systems do. And we oftentimes call them as wicked problems. They're really hard to solve. They are adaptive problems because when you solve one problem, it like kind of wiggles around and kind of emerges as a different problem. And these are, we also use the term complex problems. And so I'm not going to go through each of this, but there's a lot of literature on this, and there folks have tried to kind of distinguish between a technical problem and a complex problem, right? So a technical problem, usually the problem is well defined, solutions are known, there are not a lot of moving parts, whereas complex problem, it's not well defined. People might have like different like definitions of what the problem is, what causes the problem. Solutions are really not agreed upon, they're not known. Parts are controllable in a technical problem. In a complex problem, parts cannot be controlled, new problems emerge. So an example I always use is, fixing a car is a technical problem. It's a very hard problem, it's a very technical problem. I can do it, I take it to somebody else who knows how to do it. But what they can do is they can pause the car, right? They can lift it up, they can look at every part when it's not moving. Now think about an education system or a transportation system. You cannot pause it. You have to kind of keep intervening as the system is working, and that's very challenging. And learning is very complex in complex problems because we will, and you might have heard this, research like will be like 10 years ago this happened because of this. So the learning part in complex problems is also very important. The last thing I will say is that technical problems, the process is very linear, right? Hoist the car, check the tires, check this. And so like you kind of like can create a linear process, check boxes, lists to make sure you've done everything right. In a complex problem, everything is kind of feedback loops, dynamic processes. So it's very hard to kind of create a checklist to make sure you've done everything right, because everything is interdependent. Okay, so now, so that's kind of like about the complex problems. I'm going to kind of move into how do we think in systems? Because to solve complex problems or to manage complex problems, we have to think in systems. So a lot of the times in systems thinking, many of you have probably seen this, is that we say like problems are like an iceberg, right? 90% of the reason why a problem exists is hidden. And the only thing that you see is what is the tip of the iceberg, right? And so in systems thinking, we call it what you can see are events, right? What I mean by events, well, there was somebody lost a job, somebody got a job, or there was a shooting downtown, or this happened. So these are all events that we see that are caused or manifested by an underlying system. And in systems thinking, what we do is we try to understand what are the patterns of these events. And what I mean by pattern very specifically is that how are things changing over time? Or how is unemployment rate changing over time? How is placement rate changing over time? Um, and then we go one level deeper and ask what is the system structure or that underlying mechanism or those interdependencies that we just talked about. What are those interdependencies that are creating this pattern of event? And then once we begin to understand this structure, then we really get into like what are the mental models that are driving the design of this structure. And the reason we do this is that when we only look at events, we can react. We have to react. This is your like firefighting mode. When you see patterns, you can begin to anticipate. You can say, well, this is what we have seen in the past. We think this is what's going to happen in the future. When you think about the structure of the system, though, then you begin to think about, oh, the system is designed this way. That is why it's producing this pattern. If we change the design of the system, it's going to change the pattern of the system. And then finally, mental models. When you start thinking about mental models, you begin to reframe how you see a system. And I saw this. I was at the apprenticeship summit, 2 weeks ago, and I heard this phrase where this person was talking about bus drivers and plumbers, and he said these are not jobs. Bus drivers are um, there to keep our community safe. Like, if we don't train a bus driver well, that risks people, passengers, but also other folks in the community, right? So these are really like it's a public safety job, not a bus driver. And then for plumbers, he said this is plumbers are important for the public health of our community. These are not just like jobs that people come and do, but this is really important for the public health of our community. And I was like, that those are excellent reframes of um, the way we think about systems. I have a 7-year old, and if you have young daughters, you know how spiky they can be. And so she was watching TV one day, and I was like, "You've been watching TV for a while. Why don't we like switch this? Let's go like learn something, do some math, do some reading or writing." And she was like, "I am learning. I'm watching Wildcrafts. I'm learning all about nature. How could you say this? You should like sit with me and learn about cheetahs." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you are learning about cheetahs." And then I like, "Oh, you reframed. You got me there. You got me real good." And so I was like, once we can reframe the systems, or we can reframe the idea of why systems exist, then we can kind of come together in a different way to design or redesign the structure and change the patterns of that the system is producing. Okay, this is the last animal reference, I promise. So this is kind of a age-old story. This is kind of getting into the working together part of the puzzle of driving systems change. Is that there was a back in the day is like six people were asked blindfolded who had never seen an elephant, never heard of an elephant, go describe an elephant. And so every person kind of goes, holds like a body part of the elephant and says, elephant looks like a spear, elephant looks like a wall, an elephant looks like a rope. What this is highlighting is that all of us, and this is truly all of us, see systems from our own perspectives, right? Systems in general don't exist objectively. They are a social construction of all the um, uh, people that are looking at a system, working with a system, working within the system, right? And so what systems thinking and the process that we use in systems thinking allows us to do is help different stakeholders in who have different perspectives kind of not only see somebody else's perspective, but how the two perspectives are intertwined and interdependent and need to work together for the system to function the way we want it to function. Right. So, okay, enough animal references. Okay, I've said a lot of things just to kind of summarize all the kind of the important points. One is there are interdependencies in systems that leads to complexity, that leads to adaptive problems, or problems that just change form from one thing to another. We can only see what the system manifests, not the underlying mechanisms of the system, right? We have to really examine it to be able to kind of begin to highlight those underlying mechanisms. And we can only see parts of system, understand it from our standpoint. These are our mental models of the system. And somebody else sees the system from a completely different standpoint and has different mental models of it. Okay, I'm going to summarize there, take a sip of water, and move on to the next section. So we're going to kind of go into the nitty gritty of systems thinking a little bit here. And before going into it, I just want to clarify that systems thinking is an approach to examine complex systems by illustrating the underlying feedback mechanisms that drive the problem. Systems thinking is not going to give anybody this is the right model or this is the right way to do things. It's just a way to examine complex systems. It can give us a lot of insights, but the goal is to try to understand the underlying structure of the system that is driving the problem or that is driving the challenge that you are facing. Okay, so we're going to kind of go into a few fundamentals of systems thinking. This is really important because this is what will help you understand the case study that I'm going to share later on. So there are three fundamentals of systems thinking that I'm going to share here today. The first one is called operational thinking, right? And so Barry Richmond, famous systems thinking educator, he read a paper that was trying to kind of forecast the milk production, cow's milk production in U.S. And he looked at the model, econometric model, very fancy technical model. It included lots of variables, everything that you can imagine. But then he realized that the model doesn't include cows. And then he made this statement, which I love. Oh, that was not the last reference to an animal. I'm so sorry. This should be the last reference to an animal. If one asks how milk is actually generated, one discovers that cows are absolutely essential to the process. What Barry Richmond is trying to say is that when we do statistical modeling, a lot of the times, that we're not thinking really how systems work. What is the plumbing of the system? Right? And so in systems thinking, people pay a lot of attention to how does the system actually work. And so if you're producing, if you're doing research on milk production, cows would be at the center of that particular model, right? Because without cows, you don't have milk. So operational thinking is really important. And this is really interesting because in systems thinking, you all are the experts because you know how the system operates. You work with it day in, day out. Nobody else knows systems better than you do, right? And you kind of like see the operational part of the system that you work with. So in systems thinking, everybody is, it doesn't have to be like a researcher who has spent 20 years for them to be an expert. People who are working in the system on a daily basis, they are the experts. And there are two types of feedback loops. This is great because there's only two types, easy to remember, right? One kind of feedback loop, and you might have heard this in kind of regular language. We call this like a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, right? So this is a positive feedback loop. The way it works is it compounds, right? So the best example is, you have some money, you get some interest on that money based on an interest rate. That interest compounds on that your principal, and it kind of keeps going on. So it adds to that amount of money. So, right, this is a reinforcing feedback loop. Um, and whether it is virtuous or vicious depends really on the perspective, right? So, if this is your savings account, this is a virtuous cycle because you are getting more money. But if this is your student loan account, this is a vicious cycle because your principal might be increasing even if you are making some payments. So there is nothing inherently good or bad or positive, negative about it. The fact that this is a reinforcing feedback loop means that the process kind of compounds on each other. And then there is a balancing feedback loop in systems. And this is actually in our human bodies. There's a lot of balancing feedback loops that help us, manage how much we eat, how much um, tired we can get, how much stress we can get, all those things. And so basically the way it works is you have feeling of hunger, you eat some food. After you eat, your feeling of hunger goes down, and then you don't eat anymore, right? So it kind of controls, it's a kind of a controlling process. It constrains an action that is eating food. And then finally, and now this gets a little bit wonky here, is stocks and flows. And so here, this is really important from an operational thinking point of view is, and I used a workforce example here, is that whatever you see in a box is something that accumulates, right? So my wife and I did this, and we did in one box, it was dishes in the sink, right? So because, it accumulates. If you have a sink and dishes, you probably have experienced this. And then when you wash it or you put it in the dishwasher, it kind of goes accumulates in the dishwasher. When you turn it on, it's still there, and you empty it, it goes out, right? So it's kind of tracking how people, materials, information flow from one stage to another. So in this case, there are people in training, right? Let's imagine there's 100 people in training, and then they kind of flow out of that into being hired, and they get into this box of number of people who are hired. And so they are kind of moving through this process, and there is a time it takes to hire, so they cannot just all move at once, and they can only move there is open position, right? If there are no open positions, then nobody can move to the next stage. So stocks and flows are really kind of like the building blocks of how do you start thinking operationally about systems thinking. In my case study that I'll present, I'm not going to go into this. I just wanted to make sure I kind of shared a really important aspect of systems thinking. You can get really, really wonky with this one, and you can kind of begin to test out scenarios where you change a particular variable. So let's say if you change time to hire from half a year to 5 years, how is that going to change the overall pattern of the system we see, right? So that's kind of like some scenario testing that you can do. Okay, again, I'm now going to go move on to the next stage. Let me check my time. I'm running a little bit behind, but that's okay. I can catch up. And so now I'm going to share the application of systems thinking in workforce development. So I don't have to tell this to this group. Workforce development is really vital. There is this need to connect industry, what the industry needs with worker skills, but creating strategic alignment within workforce development ecosystem can be really challenging. But this work is really important, especially right now, because we've realized there is an aging workforce. We've realized students don't want to take on a lot of debt and go to college, and even if they go to college they may not have the right skills. And with new technology, especially AI right now, it's creating some disruption, especially in entry level jobs. So the work of workforce development, I think, is has become always vital, but I think it's even more vital now. And so, what did we do? We did some key informant interviews with 6, 7 key stakeholders who worked on workforce from a state perspective. So they worked kind of covered a lot of the state. We asked them about what are the patterns they are seeing, because we really want to understand from their point of view what are some challenges, opportunities they are seeing um, in the workforce development system right now, and used all that information to design a few systems thinking workshops. We invited them for 2 workshops. The first thing that we did is an exercise that helped us understand patterns of over time, how patterns are changing. So you cannot see this in this picture, but one of the graphs that was shared here was a skills gap, and then how it is increasing in the state of Arkansas. And then we asked them to begin to kind of, so in the first part, people identified what I would like to say the parts of the system. And in the second part, they started kind of connecting those parts and kind of showcase the interdependency of all these components within workforce development. And then third, we kind of brought it all together, showed how all the interdependencies, and I asked folks, where would you intervene in this system, right? So all these post-it notes that you see are people's ideas that they wrote down, and then they kind of put it, okay, I would intervene here, I would intervene here, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. Okay, so now I shared the system story of that island. I'm going to kind of share a system story of workforce development. And so in this particular case, this story really began with the skilled workforce gap. And the skilled workforce gap, in a very like a general aggregate term, was defined as what is the desired skilled workforce size and what is the actual skilled workforce size, right? So if the desired skilled workforce size is 100 and then the skilled workforce size is 50, the gap would be 50. Very simple. And then, so now it starts to get a little complicated here, is that once you have the skilled workforce gap, what the participants in the room told me is that it's kind of jumpstarts or creates training programs. And then when we have training programs, then you have number of people who are in training. They join the training program, they complete the training program, they add to the skilled workforce size, and they close the skilled workforce gap, right? So this was kind of like how folks started as the fundamental of workforce development, is that there's a skilled workforce gap, then you have training, you have people who in training, they complete the training, you increase the skilled workforce size, and that gap begins to close over time. Like imagine a door shutting over time, slowly, but it's shutting, right? And so now then it's like, what are some other considerations, what are some other feedback loops that impact this process? And so the first one they shared is that as more people join the training, so as the number of people in training increases, it kind of decreases the education training capacity of the system, and it decreases the number of training programs, right? So the story basically is like, we know we need this many welders, and we have welding training programs, but there's a really long waiting list. And so what happens is that this is kind of constraining the system's ability to create more welders because there is no capacity. And so you can imagine this door of skilled workforce gap closing, 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 but then the system is constrained. It doesn't have the capacity, so it doesn't close anymore, or it closes at a very slow rate. Another process that they shared is that when there is a skilled workforce gap, it also generates public-private partnerships, right? So industry is saying we need some of these skills. We want to make sure that these folks are trained properly, so they get and they work together with nonprofit government agencies, community colleges, and there's more investments in training programs, and that increases the training capacity, right? So that system was being constrained, the system was being constrained, and then there is public-private partnerships, more investments, more capacity, more training, and the system kind of the skilled workforce gap begins to close again. Another thing that they shared is that when there is public-private partnerships, then it increases the effectiveness of program because everybody is working together. When the program is effective, then it increases job placement rates, higher wages, increases retention. And all of these things increases the effectiveness of recruitment because you can kind of market it to folks saying, hey, if you do this training, we can show evidence that there's higher wages, there is higher retention, employers want you, there is higher job placement, employers want to hire you. So that creates effectiveness of recruitment, that creates more number in training. But the way the systems work, I think hopefully you are like seeing this here or you've experienced this, is that when you do something good like a public private partnership and you like kind of create effectiveness of program and effective recruitment, you have more people joining the training or wanting to join the training, but that drains at the capacity again, right? So it's like you do something, the system kind of reacts back to kind of not let you be as effective as you might want to be. And then, sorry, there's a lot going on here, trying to hide some of the older part is that when there is public private partnership, one of the stories we heard is that then those partnerships can work to kind of create a policy environment that prioritizes workforce development. That can lead to more funding. More funding means more investment in programs. Public-private partnerships also leads to more effectiveness of programs, which leads to more funding. And so, like, think about pay for performance, that is gaining a lot of traction these days. And so all of these are kind of these virtuous loops where you have more public-private partnerships, more effectiveness, more funding, more policy prioritizing workforce development. And all of that, again, leads to more public-private partnerships or stronger public-private partnerships, right? Because one of the things that folks said is that, yes, public-private partnerships are great to like say, but they require money, time, effort to start, but to sustain them as well. And so to that, we need funding, we need policies that prioritize workforce development, create incentives for those kind of partnerships. And so these are not really in feedback loops, but then we started talking about yes, number in training, but what is constraining people coming to the training? And so folks started talking about access to training, who has access to training, and what is the effectiveness of our communication of training. Because one story was that we have a lot of training programs, we have lots of resources, but how we communicate that matters a lot. Because you know people, if people don't know about these resources, then they won't access the training, they won't use the resources. One of the kind of another story that was shared was that um, there is always resource for kind of designing a program and implementing a program, but not a lot of resources to like market the program or market it really well. Another one was it always takes time to update resources. Like imagine like you have a website, people go find kind of outdated information, so that can create a lot of negative perception about the resource or the program itself. Another thing that was, and this was a really interesting story, is that you can work a lot to kind of close that skilled workforce size, and it's closing, but then the skilled workforce decides to leave, right? Whether the area, the region, or the state. And so the skilled workforce leaving kind of creates that starts to increase that skilled work, sorry, decrease that skilled workforce size and increase that gap as well. And so this was really hard because You might spend 2 years, 3 years, 5 years trying to close that skilled workforce gap. But if people are leaving, then all of that work doesn't really close the gap, right? And so conversations around like how do we retain the workforce? What is the quality of life look like? What are the wages look like that can kind of keep the trained workforce here? Okay, so that's kind of that was a lot that I shared in terms of stories. You don't have to obviously remember this all of this. I will send this slide, and then in August we are also creating a systems thinking toolkit that will be kind of cover all the basics of systems thinking, and then it will have case studies on how we apply systems thinking. So this will be as a case study included in that resource. So all of that should be ready in by late August. Okay, so this is kind of I'm getting to the place where I wrap up. So one of the conversations always was about now that we know, the system is complex, there are interdependent parts. Where would you, as experts, intervene in this? So I gave them a couple of criteria. I said in a post-it, write what the idea is, write the feasibility from your point of view. One is it's not feasible, 10 is it's very feasible, and what is the impact going to be in terms of closing the skilled workforce gap. One is no impact, 10 is very high impact. So people wrote all that and they put it on the exact place in the system that they would intervene, right? So we collected all this information and kind of created this 2 by 2 matrix where if you have high impact, high feasibility, these are unicorns. You should really like put your resources to pursue these interventions. If you have low impact, high feasibility, these are low hanging fruits. They may not really like move the needle, but for a group to kind of gain momentum, these are really good because the group can kind of implement these quickly, uh, kind of feel really good about it, feel like the group is working, increase the collaboration piece. Low feasibility, low impact, these are obviously resource wasters. Let's not pursue those. And then high impact, low feasibility are like, let's focus on longer term strategy because right now they are not feasible. But if we can actually pursue this in 2 years, 3 years, this could create a lot of impact. So, how do we kind of pick these ideas and think about somebody pursuing this as a more longer term strategy? Right. So I'm not going to go through all the ideas that were shared, um, but I'll share a few. One was a platform to connect people with resources. So, like a digital platform for the entire state where employers can come in, job seekers can come in and kind of share information, connect, right? So, this was seen as pretty high impact and feasibility, not super feasible because you can imagine how hard it is to create a platform like this, maintain it, sustain it, but still feasible. And they said, I asked, why do you think this is actually feasible? It was because they were already working on this, and really, like everybody in the group kind of thought this would be a really good resource for workers and employers in Arkansas. Another one was public-private coordination. They shared there is like some happening, but we really need to kind of, especially on a, like a regional basis, maybe like really try to understand how we can create more coordination, collaboration between public-private partnerships. And so this would be high impact, high feasible because they're already like doing it. So these are kind of the examples. So there was increased training capacity, as we shared. It is hard to close the skilled workforce gap without the training capacity. Retain skilled workforce. So one idea that they talked is when people go through workforce programs, how about there is a contract that says like, for 2 years you have to kind of stay in the region or something like that. Maybe that will help retain skilled workforce in the short term. Increase funding. So now you can see it's on the other side. It's like not very feasible because it's hard to increase funding, but it would be impactful. Um, Marketing of opportunities for people to really understand what resources are out there. So lots of kind of ideas that were floated around that we started charting. Okay, just to wrap things up, next step, as I said, this is kind of ongoing work. So part of the next step is we'll continue to refine the systems map. Even when you saw me kind of like showing the systems map, hopefully you are like, hey, you are missing this. Hey, this is not really how it works. So, kind of using those stories to continue to refine it, develop a systems thinking toolkit. I already kind of shared. We are kind of a lot of this systems thinking. Is kind of learning is in like either universities or in like center. It's like hard to access, so we're hoping to kind of create this free, easy to use resource that folks can use and learn. So again, look forward to that in end of summer. And then we're kind of focusing on a little bit more specific topics, right? Because this was just skilled workforce gap, and that's just like very broad and big. And so we've kind of started to explore focusing on what would it look like in the healthcare sector, or I've been kind of really into the model of apprenticeships and how do we use apply systems thinking to better understand how we can scale apprenticeships in particular regions. So that's really it. We can go into discussion mode, but a shameless plug here. On October 29th, we are doing a event on advancing apprenticeships at the St. Louis Fed. We'll have employers, nonprofit, workforce folks, um, very many different audience types, and it's a full day conference. So this is a save the date. We'll have registration open pretty soon. So if you can come join us, that would be wonderful. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. I had a quick question about the toolkit that you all are developing. Is it going to be kind of like a step-by-step how to walk through kind of the mapping part you said to make sure that you're not missing those critical pieces like the cows for the milk?
Yeah,
Is it going to kind of make
yeah.
sure we're not missing any of that?
So yeah, meaning I would. This is the way this is gonna be. Is we are gonna put something out there, and we'll hopefully get feedback and learn, and we're gonna improve over time, and we're gonna add more resources to this. So right now, what it has is it has some basics on the fundamentals of systems thinking, like I shared right now, but a little bit more detail. It will have the case study of Arkansas, and then developing few more case studies to put there. And we'll have resources where, for example, I used a very like a step-by-step agenda, detailed agenda to do the workshop. So we'll put it out there so people can see exactly what I did if they wanted to replicate it. So the idea is that over time, this resource becomes more and more like a playbook for folks to apply systems thinking. It may not be right away. It might just be like kind of step one in the beginning, but hopefully over time we'll get there.
So in the Q&A box, someone did mention that they loved how the reframing concept that you mentioned, a great way to think about occupations and systems and how to reframe those. I'm sure they're referring to the bus driver versus the,
Mhm.
public safety, that kind of, rethinking how you're looking at it and reframing that. So I just wanted to share that with you. And then another question was, do you have suggestions on how to connect people with training programs for workforce?
How to connect people with training programs. So
Like it says, are there any examples or anything that has worked for others that you're aware of? So I guess
so
basically re-engaging people, getting them to connect, to finish that skills gap, I guess, that you talked about, and how, that we're missing skills, and how to get people re-engaged and how to connect them with those workforce training programs.
yeah, so one of the well, yeah, there's definitely lots of models out there, but I think kind of trying to pull a theme from a lot of things that I've heard is that folks, especially if you are low to moderate income, you're juggling so many things, right? You might be like in your current job right now, you might be struggling to find childcare. You might be trying to manage the transportation that it takes, like, an hour for you to get somewhere. or just the cost of gas. And so what I've kind of like heard is really trying to get to people where they are at to provide that information and not expect people to kind of come to the door just because you have a training program. That really stuck with me because in my own life, if I wanted to do something new or different, it's very hard, right? It's like I'm going through the motions of life. And so I can't imagine somebody who is kind of trying to manage their budget, trying to kind of manage all the stresses of life, how they would kind of find that information themselves. So trying to get to the folks is always I've heard is like what works well. And in terms of kind of even workforce training, a lot of the, and this is, I'm looking into this for apprenticeships as well. Apprenticeships has about nationally average about like 45% completion rate. And that's bad, right? It's like, even if we can fix that would do a lot. And so what I've like been reading, hearing, and talking with folks, learning is just like wraparound services. People do need a lot to kind of stay the course. And it's, yes, it's about the quality of the program. Yes, it's about the skills you are learning. Hopefully it's relevant and you can get a placement. But kind of thinking from a very human centered point of view, what is all the things that are dragging them away from that training program, right? If you can kind of solve some of them, can't solve all of them, that's hard. I think that kind of like helps people stay. And then it kind of creates a little bit more of, this is I heard from an employer, is kind of a loyalty almost. It's like, oh, they're doing so much for me, they're trying to solve so many of my problems, I'm going to stick with it, right? And it's really a psychological thing as well. So that's kind of like what I've heard about training programs.
Yes. So, one of our local employers did comment, I really like get to the people where they are. This is very important in today's workforce. And yes, so meet people where they're at.
Yeah,
And then also helping provide those wraparound services because there are a lot of barriers to people being able to participate
yeah,
in additional training programs. Like you said, like outside of their already busy schedules and their work and tending to kids and all that kind of stuff. So yes, I agree. That's definitely something to think about. That was all that we had. Those are the only questions that we had in the chat right now. I'm gonna kind of do our wrap up, and then if anything else pops into the Q&A box, I'll ask you at the very end. But as of right now, that was all we had in there. So, and we are getting close on time. We have about 10 minutes left. If anybody has any more questions, they can pop them in the box. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us for our presentation on driving systems change today. Please continue to follow us on our social media at American Job Centers of Northwest Tennessee, American Job Centers of Southwest Tennessee, and American Job Center of Greater Memphis to find out about our upcoming events and registration information for our virtually speaking webinars in the future. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Chalise, thank you so much for all of the information that you shared today. We really appreciate it.
thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah,
It was
have a
great.
great
Fun.
day.
Yes, well.